The golden age of affordable guitars has started, but it's not going to last forever. Why? I'm going to tell you. So, I need to start this off with a disclaimer. The term affordable guitars that I'm talking about in the context of this video are really affordable if you are living in the developed world, like I do. I live in Singapore, or if you're living in the US or you're living in Western Europe, then these guitars, in the context of how expensive other things are around you, are affordable. For a lot of people in the developing world, whether you live in, say, India, Indonesia, Vietnam, I'm just using three examples from my part of the world, these guitars aren't affordable. They are more expensive than many people's monthly salaries, and be much, much more actually. So, with that out of the way, let's talk about why the golden era of affordable guitars is beginning. I thought of making this video after I played a SE McCarthy 594 standard. And, I was looking at the price of the guitar, inflation adjusted, it is about the same as the price that I paid for my first electric guitar almost 20 years ago, Epiphone Les Paul. And I was just shocked at the difference in quality and the difference in just utility that the McCarthy 594 standard had versus my very beloved, very well used, very fully utilized, very functional nonetheless Epiphone Les Paul, right? There is just no comparison. The Epiphone Les Paul, I love it to bits. I played it all through university for many years after that. But it had its problems, The fretwork, especially beyond the 12th fret, was outrageous. Goodness knows how I learned how to play all the Fade to Black and all those different solos. The electronics failed on me once in the middle of a gig. Anyways, the long story short is that the quality of instrument that you can get for a similar amount of money, inflation adjusted today, is just beyond anything that we have seen traditionally. I'm not the first person to notice this. I think any person talking about guitars on YouTube or anywhere else, or even on the forums, will tell you that made in Indonesia, made by Cortec guitar is functionally pretty, and especially the PRSs, because PRSs really, they don't just make cheaper versions of US guitars, they make the best guitar they can for the price point. Particularly these guitars are, they are perfectly functional instruments that somebody can keep and use for years and years. You don't really need a USA made guitar. But here's the thing. This is not going to last. When I say this is not going to last, I think the quality will be there. The Indonesian factories are now doing an amazing job. But the relative price of what you can get these guitars for now is not going to be the same as what it is today, tomorrow, day after tomorrow, and so on and so forth. These guitars are going to get much, much more expensive for you relative to your salary or your cost of living, say in the US or in Western Europe, or for me here in Singapore. And why is that? Let's just think about another example. Let's just think about South Korean guitars, right? We've had the South Korean factory, World Music Instruments, everybody from ESP, LTD, PRS SE, even Chapman made the guitars in the South Korean factory. For the longest time, all the old PRS SEs from, say, the 2000s are from that factory. But what happened? Excuse me. What happened? What happened was that the cost of living, or the cost of wages, or the relative cost of living in Korea, in South Korea versus the developed world, that gap became narrower and narrower and narrower. South Korea is now practically a developed country. I think it is a developed country, frankly speaking. So the wages are pretty much almost there, getting close to what you have as wages in the US or in Western Europe. Consequence of that is that these Far Eastern guitars from South Korea are no longer that cheap. They're amazing guitars, but if you look at a new made in South Korea guitar, they're getting pretty close to made in US prices. Think of some of the new, I think there's a famous Jackson signature that came out that was like $2,500. I'm forgetting the artist's name. Even some of the Chapmans, the last Rabia signature, the one with all the fancy specs, it was almost pretty much as expensive as a US made guitar. So South Korea, which used to be a traditional hub for lower cost guitars, is no longer a lower cost guitar. By the way, this story doesn't only go back to the 2000s and South Korea. This goes back even 20, 30, 40 years to Japan. Japan was once a lower cost destination. Some of the original Squires were made in Japan because it was cheaper than the US. Now Japan, is pretty much as expensive as the US. So, this is not a new story. Now, here's the thing: the latest country in the world where you get starting to get amazing instruments at a low price point is Indonesia. Um, Indonesia is not going to remain forever that different in cost of living versus the US. I mean, it's a very populous country. It's growing extremely fast. It has a lot of natural resources. You can look it up, and their government is actually making a very deliberate attempt for Indonesia to move higher up in the value chain, which is let it not just be a source of low cost materials. Let it become a place where they do a lot of value add. So Indonesia is going to become relatively more expensive to the US. And guess what? Then we start all over again. We start all over again, where Indonesia now, just like Korea became too expensive, now Indonesia is too expensive to make a low cost guitar. So this cycle is going to go on. And honestly, this is not a cycle that can go on forever, because what has been happening, if you notice globally, is that over the last 70, 80 years, you have had the developed world and you've had the developing world, but a lot of the developing world has been catching up. And that process has been accelerating. Last 20 years, you've seen a lot of it. I mean, I experience it. I grew up in India. If I see the relative cost of India versus the developed world, what it was when I first left India 20 years ago, and what it is today, there is no comparison. India is much, much more expensive than it was. So the point that I'm trying to make to you is, for those of you like me now, sitting in the developed world, when you say, I can't believe they make a guitar for this price point, which can do for $200, I can get this, or $300, I can get that, or $400. Realize that these super crazy price points are built on extremely cheap wages based on developing countries being far behind developed countries. And that is not going to last forever. So, just to bring it back to guitars, today you can get a wonderful, super functional, say, PRS SE McCarthy 594 standard. I keep coming back to that guitar because that's a guitar that kind of sparked, that I could not believe cost this amount of money. Or the Harley Bentons, there's so many of them. Of course, they need a lot of work once you buy them, but they're all amazing nonetheless. Today, with your and mine developed country salary, wage, and the cost of living, you can buy and you can get these very, very affordable guitars, because other cost of living in other countries, the low cost countries, is much, much cheaper. Fast forward a few years, this is not always going to be the case. Now, we don't have to think 10 or 20 years in advance. I really see Indonesia as a location becoming much, much more expensive, maybe in the next 5 years. So the conversation that we had with South Korean guitars, we're probably going to have it with Indonesia in maybe 5, 6, 7 years. Then you have to find a new destination. And the new destination is not just a matter of finding another cheap country. It's also a question of trading up the people getting the quality up there. Initial made in Indonesia guitars were not great. I have a bunch of Ibanez premiums, which I really detested, honestly. I could not believe, that they were selling that. So I do know what a not so good copy of a good guitar can feel like. So then where do we go next from Indonesia once Indonesia gets more expensive? Vietnam is currently half the price, half the manufacturing cost of China. So China is, by the way, no longer the cheapest. China has become more expensive. And then with all the geopolitics going on, there's a whole different complication with China. So where do you go? India is not, again, known for making guitars. Of course, you have a bunch of countries in the continent of Africa. Maybe you go there, but I don't know. So, folks, just realize this. Just realize what is the reason for the cheap guitars or the affordable guitars that you and me can get today relative to what we earn. Recognize that it was not going to forever be the case. Enjoy them while you can. Now, the good news is, even when these affordable guitars become less affordable, they are still, in the larger scheme of things, they are still very good guitars for the money. I mean, I would honestly say, I'm not saying this because I have anything against Gibson. Please look behind me. I do love my Gibsons. But a good made in Indonesia guitar, the quality is getting close to what a Gibson is, frankly speaking. I mean, of course, the quality of the the materials used are not going to be that premium. They're going to take whatever cut of wood that they can get. But the quality that you're getting for these cheaper guitars are pretty good. So even if they get more affordable, even if they get more expensive, they're still very good guitars for the money. It's just that you will no longer be able to almost buy a guitar like on a like almost as a disposable thing. Oh, I just felt like it today, so I just got this guitar. It's super cheap. Let's just get that, right? Like an impulse purchase. That'll go away. That's okay. I think it's not the worst thing in the world. I think some impulse control is good for all of us, especially for me. Look behind me. I've clearly not been successful. So yeah, folks, so this is it. The golden era of affordable instruments like the made in Indonesia ones is upon us. Enjoy it while you can. Just don't think it'll last forever. And then we'll all be happy. Take care.